everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny. I am starting off my June reading wrap-up with finishing Home/Land by Rebecca Mead. I listened to this on audio and it was narrated by the author and I really enjoyed it. So this memoir contrasts her living in New York City with her husband and son. Her husband is American, her son was born in New York, and she grew up in England. And she moves to England when she's a young adult and makes a life there, and ends up settling in Brooklyn with her husband and son and her husband's children from a previous marriage. So that's the beginning, and during the course of the story, we follow her internal struggles with where she's living. So while they have a really great friend group in Brooklyn, they've set down roots, they feel really, and then obviously her husband's family lives there as well. When Donald Trump is elected president, they start to feel very uncomfortable with the way that the city is changing and the way that America's going, and they contemplate moving back to England, which is where Rebecca was from. And so you really go internally into their decision-making process, which I really enjoyed. I think often with memoir, authors gloss over things that are things that you actually really want to know about, and in this book that doesn't happen. I think she goes into everything, all the little details of why they made the decision, the things they're leaving behind, the things they're going towards. You find out the history of Rebecca's family and some of the history of her husband George's family. So it's really about place, it's about connection to place through history. It's about raising children and the decisions you make when you're raising your children. And she went into a really beautiful passage near the end about how she wanted, like, the things that you want to pass down to your children. And one thing that she wanted to pass down to her son was this sense of wanderlust, this sense of never quite being in the exact place that you necessarily want to be. And I thought that was really interesting because like for myself, I think I've always had that sense of wanderlust, that sense of moving beyond. And I know there's a lot of people that don't, and they live in their hometowns and they raise their families there and they're very happy to do that. But that is something that I have, and it's not something that a lot of other members of my family seem to have. And so I've always thought that I got that from like a previous generation. Obviously, the people that traveled to Canada and to settle here were dissatisfied with where they were living in Europe. So I thought it was really interesting how she contrasted the cities. She goes into details about the history of different parts of each city, and she brings in the story of another person who has a very different perspective on life. His name is John, and he is a carpenter, but also an ex-con. And so you get a lot of these contrasting things, but I thought she wove them very brilliantly and very poignantly, and she shares in a very, emotional and genuine way about her experience of going through this change in her life. And so I thought it was really well done, very compelling, and it had a lot of great food for thought, but also like really puts you into her shoes and you follow along on her journey. So yeah, it was a lovely little memoir and I would recommend it. It's actually new. It's actually a 2022 release, which I didn't really realize when I took it out on the Libby app. And that's cool because I don't read a lot of 2022 releases. I don't read a lot of books in the year they're released. So there's one down for me for this year. And I will check in again later when I finish another book. Hey everyone. I finished Nightbitch by Rachel Yoder. This book is a ride. This book is, it's like nothing I've read before. I think that, you know, if you don't, there are very specific things in this book that if you don't like them, you're going to hate this book. There's a lot of animal violence. So I would say that people that are sensitive to that don't read this. But I can also say unequivocally that this book is connected me with feelings that I haven't thought about in a long time since being a really new mom. And this book is about the violence and the darkness that comes with our animal selves and bearing a child. And our society very much cleanses that experience and assumes that mothers are pure and good and loving and nurturing, and that those are the only qualities that mothers are allowed to have. You know, we're not allowed to be angry. We're not allowed to have rage. We're not allowed to be bitter. We're not allowed to have ambition. We're not allowed to be more than being a mother. And this book puts all of that into perspective, and it goes deep, deep, deep into those feelings for one mother who's an artist. And I think the combination of this mother being an artist is very important as well. I don't know if every mother in every career has these same feelings. I kind of feel like they would on some level, but the vehicle that Rachel Yoder used to explain it is contemporary art, and I think that that could alienate a lot of people because because I think a lot of people don't believe that the protagonist in this book, the mother, Nightbitch, is actually making art, and that's addressed in here. But essentially, her life becomes a performance piece, and she is connecting with the deep inner animal aspect of motherhood. So it's really hard to explain this book in a way that would make it more appealing to more readers. I feel like you're either going to get this and like it or not. And it's not really there. I highly doubt there's any middle ground here for people. It's, for me, it acknowledged a lot of things that I felt along the way of my mothering. Having come past a lot of this to another place, I still feel like it acknowledges a lot of things that as a woman I was conditioned to be, not just as a mother. So it's also about caregiving, and it's about what caregiving does to you as a human, and how it takes your internal desires and it pushes them down in order for you to be able to give of yourself to someone else. So while this is about being a mother, it could also just as easily be a daughter caring for her elderly parents, a husband caring for his ailing wife. All of those feelings are tied up in this idea of what caregiving as an activity does to the person who is doing it. So you use up all of your energy, all of your personal autonomy and personal care for someone else because they need it, right? And so it's not, there's no like, you're a bad person because I have to take care of you. It's like, how do we care for someone but maintain a level of self, a level of sanity, a level of self-preservation, and be caregivers? It's a very interesting conversation, and I think it's something that's coming up now more than ever, because for hundreds of years, women have been expected to just do it, to just do the caregiving free of charge, like don't charge for it. Like, oh, I'm just going to take care of you. Like, don't pay me any money for this. This is just me being a good person. Like, because I'm a good woman and a good person, I'm going to care for you, and I'm going to give up my own sense of self, my own need for care, my own need for acknowledgement, because I'm a martyr to this process, right? And we're trained to do this. And a lot of women do it their whole lives and deny themselves their whole lives. Some women balance that, and they care and they take care of themselves. Some women only think of themselves and refuse to care. So there's many, it's a spectrum of care, and this is men too. Men can be caregivers, and so there's a spectrum of care that we all live on, and this book is talking about that. And I think it's a really, really compelling thing to think about, because we live in a culture now where caregiving is finally starting to come onto the table as a thing to talk about, not just as a given. It's not just a given that someone's going to care for you when you need it. Who is that going to be? What do they have to sacrifice in order to do that care? And why are they a bad person if they don't give you that care? And why are you a good person if you run yourself into the ground taking care of someone else? Like, there's all these things to talk about in caregiving, and this book goes there, and it taught, there's a lot more. There's like art and wildness, and your animal nature, and what being a good parent is versus being a bad parent. I'm really interested in that as a topic. There's a few books I've read in the last while that talk about bad mothers and the concept of being a bad mother and what is a bad mother, and the standard of what a bad mother is versus what a bad father is. I mean, it's very, very different, right? So there's still those double standards. There's also the idea of women having agency and saying, no, you're going to look after your child. I'm going to go do something else, and not feeling guilt about that. There's so much in here. So, yeah, I think that if you liked books like Bear by Marian Engel, or Suzanne by Annie Barbeau-Lavalette, which I loved, this is another book that pushes your comfort. You're not going to be comfortable. It's very uncomfortable to read this on purpose. It's supposed to be. So, but oh my gosh, so interesting, so compelling, amazing. I think this is Rachel Yoder's debut. I mean, it's a really great book. So I really enjoyed this read. And if you think by what I've said that you can handle all those things, then definitely check it out. If you can't handle all those things, maybe skip it, because it's a lot. It's violent. There's a lot of introspection. There's a lot of like breakdown, a mother breaking down to be rebuilt and to come back as something else. Yeah, so proceed with caution. And I'll check in again when I finish another book. Hey everybody. I finally finished The Spring Heat Reigns, A South Indian Diary by David Shulman. I felt like this book took a really, really long time to read, and there was a couple of reasons for that. One of them is because it's a lot of names, like places names, poets names, languages, like words that I just stumbled over for most of the book. So, he uses a lot of the original Telugu and Tamil words, and it's just a lot of long Indian names and words that I, couldn't read quickly. Like, you can't, when it's not your language, you're trying to read it, I was stumbling over the sections of the words and things. So that's one reason it took me longer to read. I really, overall, I enjoyed reading it, and I kept reading it because of the exposure to culture that I didn't know. So I don't really know much about South India. And I wouldn't say that this book necessarily tells you a lot about South India, because it's mostly about the poetry, because David Shulman was learning Telugu and was studying it. He's a language appreciator and a speaker of many different languages, and has a deep love of India, and so has spent, many years living there, connecting with people, connecting with poets, translating poetry, doing all those things. So that's what this book is about. It's about the 7 months he spent there. So he was there from let me just make sure I'm telling you the right thing. February till the end of August. And he kind of talks about the title, Spring Heat Rains, represents 3 kind of seasonal areas. So when he's first there in February, it's kind of like spring weather. Then the heat comes, so like the extreme heat, and then the monsoon comes, and that's your rains. So there was a lot of it. The thing that kept me going in this book was his connection to the river, which is in the town where he was staying. It's called the Godavari River. And so it was one of the first things he says in the diary is, why did I come here? It was the river is calling me. And then you have some little maps that he showed. And so because I've been reading about rivers, and I felt very connected to that when he said that. And I enjoyed reading about him traveling around, him going to different temples, going to different, services where people were worshiping different gods and deities all over South India, studying with different poets. I didn't know who these people were, and there is a glossary in the back that describes who some of the people are. But I didn't really bother to go read those because I just didn't think it was going to do much for me to help me. Like, ultimately, there were so many names and places and people that I did not know, that to try to retain that information would have probably been pointless for me, because I don't retain people's names very well anyway. So what I was reading it for was more about his experience, having his day-to-day living, what it was like to endure the weather that he was enduring, and just describing the culture around him as he was visiting. So for that, it's a really interesting thing, and I would say it is very much a diary. So it's fragmented, and the thoughts can be fragmented in it. He went into sometimes describing different stories of different goddesses and gods, and different myths and legends as well. So enjoyable. And if you have any sort of specific fascination with southern India, Telugu, the language, or Tamil, or even some Sanskrit, I think you might find this interesting. And if you're interested in Indian poetry and its history, and its and maybe the life of a translator, and how that all connects, then check this one out. Hey everyone, I just finished Pleasantview by Celeste Mohammed, and I really, really enjoyed this. This was the Caribathon read-along for June, and this is connected short stories. I mean, it's called a novel, and there is overlap in the short stories to other characters in the book, so I think that's why they refer to it as a novel. But you don't really stick with exclusively one character, so it definitely has a feel of interconnected short stories, and I think that this is an example of an author doing that really well. So I think sometimes with these types of stories, there's a lack of cohesion. They're a bit too disconnected, but this one felt just right. And I think that Celeste Mohammed is a wonderful writer. The characters were really well developed in a short amount of time. You really got a feel for Trinidad, Tobago, and other experiences around Trinidad and Tobago. So some of the other Caribbean islands, and then even into New York in the U.S. So in terms of giving any reader a really good picture of life for real people in Trinidad and Tobago, I thought this was absolutely really compelling. There's definitely some hard-hitting topics in here, but you get to see like complex people living complex lives, and doing their best to make it in a world that's in a lot of cases set against them. So I think this is a wonderful novel, and I would highly recommend it. And it was a great way to finish up my reading for June. So I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.